And then finally, to advanced level management education, we partnered with Tulane and Xavier universities last year and over the spring of this year to present a very advanced high-level executive education program that paired the participants in the program with mentors. And this today is a part of, you're getting a sampling of, what we do in that program for the entrepreneurs of color. And because of the COVID situation, we wanted to make this training available to all entrepreneurs in the city. So the InvestNOLA program is actually a part of the JP Morgan Chase national program called Ascend, where 13 urban cities are participating in this accelerated program for businesses of color to help them scale. And the beauty of this program is that each city gets to design their program based on the needs of their city. And so we decided, there was a huge gap for those existing businesses, hovering around $1 million, and they're stuck. And without, getting them access to what we call the 3M approach: management, the education, the mentorship and training, market opportunities. And we work with a table of about 30 or so private and public sector procurement officers, facilities managers, supplier diversity representatives who are intentionally working and strategizing to increase their companies and their organizations' spend with entrepreneurs of color. So this past spring, we did graduate our first cohort of 13 businesses. Each of them went through the program, identified growth opportunities for their businesses, developed growth strategies and plans to implement once they left the program. And many of them are already doing that and have taken the leap into implementing new plans. One of those, I'll just say, is Diversity Employed. Krista Pouncey Dyson was one of the InvestNOLA participants who owned a company that did digital media for other companies. And so her growth strategy was to do this platform that connected minority job seekers with good job opportunities. And that is now working. So if anybody's interested, diversityemployed.com. And so today we invite you all to experience just a sampling of the executive management education that we produce in the InvestNOLA program. So we'd like to thank our sponsors, JP Morgan Chase and the Certina Foundations, and all of our local procurement partners, our financial consortium, and advisory board, all who work diligently to maintain the excellence of this program. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenter for today, who is Mr. Dave Parker. Dave is out of the Seattle area. And so in addition to the university speakers, we also complement the program with practitioners like Dave, who have tons of experience and have done this, been there, done it, and sold businesses and come back and did it again. So we are just excited to have Dave here today to talk about pivoting strategies. So I'll tell you a little bit about Dave before I turn it over to him. He's an entrepreneur, 5-time founder, venture capitalist, and a board member. He's part of 9 transactions as founder and board member. His 25+ year career has highlighted his ability to innovate new ideas and scale product and service companies in the US and internationally. He's a frequent speaker at community, university, and accelerator events across the globe. Dave started his venture capital career with Mitsui & Company in Cupertino, California. And from 2013 to 15, he served as Senior VP of Program and Peoples for UP Global, the merged parent company of Startup Weekend and Startup America. In 2014, the UP Global team held over 1,250 events in 120 countries and 640 cities worldwide with over 74,000 attendees. The nonprofit company was sold to Techstars in June of 2015. So recognizing a gap in the market between Startup Weekend, Inspire events, and accelerated programs, Dave started a program and corresponding book called 6-Month Startup, the basis of his program's content today throughout multiple cities. So without further ado, Dave, I'm gonna give you the floor.
Thanks, Lynette. It's great to, I would say, be there with you, but we'll get back to that again. I'm looking forward to getting a chance to come hang out in New Orleans again. And good morning, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here and uh, get us kicked off and started. In that time we have today, really, I'm here to kind of help brainstorm with you all and help really address where I can be helpful with your businesses. But the content or the topic today is really about pivoting and iterating and really trying to help you understand like what other businesses areas should we consider going into. A couple of quick notes in the chat window. The slides are there on SlideShare. So if you want to follow along or download the slides, you can get them from SlideShare as well. And the previous link is for a program we just kicked off today with Steve Case's Revolution Fund and with Rodney Sampson's OHUB to do a virtual Rise of the Rest tour. So when I was at Startup Weekend and Up Global, Steve was our board chair, and we did the very first bus tour with Steve. So he did 4 cities in 4 days. What I loved about Steve is he was on the bus, right? Clearly Steve could have used a plane to do that, but it's like, nope, I'm here for the bus tour, and super genuine guy. And they're doing a virtual version of that, and with a program pitch night on December 3rd. And there'll be $2 million of investment coming from Revolution Fund and from Morgan Stanley. So if that's interesting to you, click on that one too. It'll get you that information. I'll be running the programming for that. So we have a 1-day program and a 4-weekend program that we're doing in the run up to it. So a little bit of a resource there that's available to you. All right, well, Lynette already told you about me. The only other thing I'd highlight is Dad of 4 yeah, this is a crazy season, right? And Lynette knows we just had my son's wedding was last Friday night in our backyard. So, because in the land of COVID, things are just kind of crazy. Just one other note there is, I think the thing that keeps me coming back to doing work with founders is everywhere I go, the thing I love about getting a chance to work with founders is it's my tribe. Right, so people who are willing to go take risks, go grow value, create value for their families and for employees, and it's the thing I love about what I get to go do. So, all right. So the topic today is really iterations and pivots, and we'll talk about it contextually about pivots, but they obviously range from small to large. If you think about an iteration, it's really just a minor change in the business. Like, how do we go to market differently, or what's our product mix, or how much service revenue do we have versus product revenue? Those iterations are relatively small changes. When I think about pivots, I think about wholesale changes in the business. Like we went from selling airplanes to selling tires, or tires to airplanes, right? So it's a wholesale change to take advantage of the current market conditions. And obviously the market conditions have been really wacky. Or the other option is you persevere, right? And just kind of hang in and doing what you're doing. External factors obviously is a huge impact. I would tell you that of the businesses that I've started myself, of the 5, 3 of them I sold and 2 of them I closed, and one in a super epic fashion, like a massive crater. But it was in 2008, and in September of 2008, the previous quarters we were on, your compound annual growth rate was going well, and you all know what happened in September of 2008. By October of 2008, the business basically vaporized, and there was no revenue. There was just expenses from people. And we had to have that tough decision of, I carried it too long myself personally. From a personal impact standpoint, it was a challenge. So sometimes persevere isn't really an option. And I think the challenge for us as founders and entrepreneurs is we're perpetually optimistic, right? It's both a blessing and a curse. And as we talked about last time, having a framework to think about making those decisions is a unique challenge. And those slides are available to you. We'll make sure we get them out if you weren't here for the previous session. But having a framework to think about, do we persevere or do we need to make changes? So today we'll address them in the context of minor changes, major changes, give you some examples, but also give you some time to brainstorm with the group and everyone here around, like, what things do you think might be useful to iterate to? And I'll give you a framework for thinking about those changes. So the first question is like, where do we pivot to, right? So one of the questions that comes out is like, hey, if this is a crummy market that we're in, or just this is a season that we're in, we want to make sure that we don't pivot to something worse. So one of my mentors early in my career of being a founder said, by the way, where there's mystery, there's margin. And the inverse of it's also true. Where there's no mystery, there's no margin. So if you think about it in context of pricing as an example, before the internet, one of the challenges was no one knew what the cost of something was relative to wholesale pricing. But now with the internet, there's wholesale pricing is available to almost all things. So if you wanted to buy a truck or a car, you can figure out what the wholesale price is. Recently, my oldest son had a car accident. He got hit, and we went to TrueCar to get a price on a new car for him. And little Subaru starter, not a super expensive car. And we got a price, and we kind of shopped around the dealers, and one of the dealers was like, well, they just went right to the cost. So the wholesale price. And the fact that that information is widely available means it can be a really tough business to be in, because it's hard to protect your margins. So one of the things I would encourage you to think about is, if you're going to pivot, where do you pivot to, and is it a good place to pivot? And we'll talk about that back of the napkin math. So commodity pricing is obviously bad, where pricing is completely transparent, where it might be the mystery is really you. And one of the things when I ran a consulting company that I always work with the first-time consultants on is, the thing that comes easiest to you isn't necessarily the thing that is the easiest for your customer. But we tend to discount it, because that's the way we look at it and go, well, that's really easy. And the answer is, well, no, it's easy to you, but it's not necessarily easy to everybody else. So that's a pricing question at some point of like, are you charging enough for the service that you're providing or not? And part of that's based on what the market rate is. Part of it is based too on your confidence to sell a higher rate. And we'll talk more about pricing in a bit. So one of the things I would encourage, and we'll break it down into taking market share or taking wallet share here later. But one of the things I'd encourage you to do is just continue to get close to your customer and talk with them about where are they experiencing challenge and pain in the current market conditions, and look for opportunities there around your existing customer base. But getting close to your customers is super helpful, because it'll help inform your decision about where you pivot to. And where are they willing to pay to help solve the problem? And I think it's one of those things that if you have long-term customers, and one of the things I would ask them is, I'd go survey them and talk to them face-to-face, or Zoom to face, right? Face to Zoom, around what things they're experiencing in their business and where they're having business challenges. And if there's anything you can do to help eliminate some of those challenges for them. Where they pay you to do it. That's the start of the process of, do you make an iteration or do you make a pivot? And then, can you find the products or services that would allow you to expand the business? And just as a framework for thinking about pivoting, does it make sense do you see a way and a path for you to get to that pivot location? I think one of the other things at starting point is like, what are your assets? So I'm a media fan. So I always think of the movie Princess Bride, where somebody says, well, what are our assets? What do we have? Right. And the question there is the people that represent your customers and your team are part of your asset base. What do they have that's unique knowledge or skill sets in what you do? What relationships do you have with suppliers today? What access do you have for customers? And all that has to operate within capital constraints. So since money's never easily accessible from the economics perspective, we have to do it with an understanding of what could we do with the current constraints that we have. And one of the things we'll be talking about in the next couple of weeks next few weeks is the marketing. Is how do you do marketing with limited budget, and so that the marketing can begin to take market share itself and start to fund itself. The challenge on a marketing basis is that most companies in the US spend about $40,000 a year on marketing, which means you can either hire a marketer or you can spend money doing marketing. But of all the tasks you already have on your list to do, becoming a marketing expert is a challenging one to add on top of it. So we'll talk about that in a few weeks out, but just know that the context of this is within the capital constraints I have for the business today, which recognizes that we don't have lots of burn rate. So I've done both of those, by the way, where it's been self-funded by Dave, done other ones that were venture-backed funded by investors. And so both of those are reality of what you have to deal with.
Can
So
you maybe explain what burn rate is?
yeah, so burn rate and run rate is really how much capital do you have in the bank to get you to how many months until you run out of capital, given current revenues and current cash in the bank. And the approach to it, especially as we look at marketing here in the next few weeks, is how do we create incremental margin and incremental cash with that investment, rather than look at it as a, hey, if I had $100,000 to spend, here's how I'd spend it. That's not realistic. And I think one of the things we find, especially in banking relationships, banks are happy to fund stuff that doesn't need funding, but they're not happy to fund stuff they haven't proven yet. So one of the approaches we'll take to it is, how do we take some incremental dollars that we have available and recognizing they're not large, invest those in a way that we can measure and monitor what we're getting for returns, so that we can use that money to invest a little bit more and invest a little bit more. So the approach is investing out of what I have available, not necessarily going out. It's which comes first in the chicken and egg story. From a banking perspective or a loan perspective, with minor exceptions, the answer is you have to show that the motion and the sales and marketing motion first before you can get funding. And it feels like a catch-22, and honestly it is. So we just have to find a way to incrementally do it. But that's what burn rate is, or how much runway you have is relative to cash in the bank and current accounts receivable and cash coming in. And all of us know as founders that the first thing that happens is we don't pay ourselves, or we definitely don't pay ourselves enough, right? So yeah, so what assets do you have as a starting point, and within those capital constraints is important. So one note along that way, I was talking with a business yesterday, and they have a customer concentration problem. And for those of you who aren't familiar with customer concentration, they have one really big customer. And I was asking them, how are the economics of those customers? How much cash in the bank does that customer have? Because their risk is, wow, if that customer pays them late in 60 or 90 days instead of 30 days, how does that impact your cash flow? Or if that customer has a risk of going out of business, you'd want to know it sooner rather than later. So the risk to them was, wow, if the company goes out of business, we're done. So we were just talking about customer concentration in general, and how do you expand your customer base so that you don't have too many eggs in one basket, if you will. So short term, the risks are significant. Longer term, by the way, it impacts your business value. One of the things we'll talk about at the end of these sessions is about, gosh, how do I sell a business, or how do I transition a business to a family member or to employees? Because for most of us as founders, all of our assets are tied up in this one business. And it's always a challenge of, how do I make that transition, and how do I ultimately sell something so I can recoup some money to retire, so I don't keep having to do this for the rest of my life. Some of us, I know for me too, I don't know that I'll ever not work. Like, this is part of my identity and what I do, but I'd like to have the option, just saying. So whether I get to do it or not becomes a different question, but I'd like to have the option to do it. So the long-term question there is, having a more diverse customer base allows you not to have customer concentration. So something to think about as you move forward. All right, so we talked about assets can you create. One of my favorite quotes by Bill Gates is, we all overestimate what we can do in 1 year and underestimate in what we can do in 10 years. My guess is, if I did a survey of everybody on the call, the answer would be, how long have you been in business? And the answer is, a lot longer than I thought I was going to be, right? So from an investor perspective, when I invest as a venture capitalist in a company, we're typically with that company for 7 to 10 years. And as founders, because we're optimistic, we tend to overestimate what we can do in the next quarter or 4 quarters, but underestimate what we can do in 10 years. So I would just encourage you to think about, like, in the grand scheme of things, we're in this wacky reset of the business environment that we're in. What stuff can I do now? But what stuff can I build for over the long haul, if I really want to extend the life of the business, or transition it to my kids, or maybe sell the business at a future date. So one of the things I encourage you to think about as you do that is a lot of us are good at vision. Like we can see the future as if it exists. That's kind of the founder's dilemma. But I also want to make sure the back of the napkin math works. So if you're going to pivot, I want you to pivot to a place that is giving you, that's a good place to pivot to rather than pivoting to a place that's a challenging place to pivot to. So that same company conversation yesterday, the company's getting ready to sell. And we were talking about, they have an industry segment concentration. They're very segmented to a particular industry segment. And we were talking about what other segments or what other vertical markets they could expand into. And one of the topics that came up was like, well, we were responding to an RFP or a bid for doing what we do, but doing it for retail. And we had this conversation about like, retail is a tough business, as many of you know, because you're in retail, right? Retail is not a great business to sell into because you all don't need more expenses. You need more revenue. So we had a conversation about what market should they pivot to. And one of the things I drew out for them and included in this today is like, one of the things you want to think about is if we're going to make a pivot, we want to pivot to an area where the customer has a high level of pain that we can fix. And they also have a high willingness to pay. So you want to be in that top right quadrant, not in the quadrant that's like, oh yeah, this is definitely a problem, but people won't pay for it, or the customer doesn't have the money to pay for it. And I think a lot of us as founders look around and we're like, oh, well, that's clearly a pain point over there. But we haven't asked the question of like, yeah, but is this customer willing to pay for it? And one of the things I would encourage you as you think about these contexts of pivoting we're going to talk about is like, is it something where people have the ability to pay, or is it genuinely a problem? So having run a nonprofit and run for-profits, like running the nonprofit was great because we got to go work with startups around the globe, which was super cool. And it was a big problem. Like helping startups get launched is not, it's a massive problem and opportunity. The problem is there's no money in it. So it had to be done as a nonprofit, which was great. And we had a chance to have some big reach into that. The challenge is, as a business, there's lots of problems that you could solve. And I think about it as being kind of below the waterline, right? There's things that are below the waterline. You're like, that's a problem, but it's tough to make any money at. And one of the things I like to encourage you to think about is like, which ones of all the problems that are there in the market, which ones are the ones that you can actually go make money at versus which ones are the ones that are really tough to make money at. So think about that as context as you think about pivoting. The other one is just kind of, are we stepping into headwinds or tailwinds? I think one of the big ahas of this whole process of dealing with the post-COVID world is most of the businesses I talk to are experiencing either one extreme or the other. There's very little neutral. Either COVID has created massive tailwinds, or COVID has created massive headwinds and the businesses are closing or look to be, on that trajectory if they don't pivot. So one of the things I'd encourage you to think about is don't just jump out of one area of business because you're running away from it. Think about which one you want to run to in the process, because we want to make sure you're not stepping out of one challenge into another challenge. Because sometimes the grass looks greener. I always say it looks greener because there's generally more fertilizer on it. So it goes with the territory. So are you stepping from a headwind to a tailwind? So let me do some pivot breakdowns if you're in the product businesses. So if you sell products today or services are the two big categories I think about, and there may be a mix of both where you have both products and services. The services are going to be, you're going to look at that as a key metric of what's my bill rate and pay rate. So so for example, if Dave's a contractor with me and I can bill him out at $50 an hour, do I pay him $25 an hour? So that's going to give me 50% gross margin. The question is can I sell Dave into more clients at a higher rate, or can I get more Daves to go as contractors to help me fulfill those services, whether I'm a commercial landscaper or I'm in the consulting business or in the web services business. So there's a blend of product sales and and service revenue, and you may have both. When I think about products, the nice thing about products is you can make money in your sleep with products. I don't have to have people that deliver it. It's something I can ship or fulfill. And the questions are today, if I look at that side of the business, if you and I were sitting down on a cup of coffee, I'd look at it and say, well, what percentage of your business is product today? And what percentage of your business is services today? And let's look at each of those as a dial and say, okay, how do we change the product mix or how do we change the services mix? So your product mix variables today are what products are you currently selling, which have the best gross margins, which is the difference between what you're paying for the product and your cost of goods and what you're selling the product for. And look at it from the standpoint of which ones are my most profitable products. One of the other things I'd want to know is which products do you end up selling first? Like they're your lead products. That's what people come to you for. And which products then do you sell as follow-on products, or is there a good mix to that? And we'll talk about it in the context of what is upstream revenue and what's downstream revenue. So for example, what things do the customer has to look at and say, oh, before I can buy your product, I have to have these things in place. Or after I buy your product, I end up buying these things as well. Because what we're trying to look at is how do we extend the pie and get a bigger pie and think of it as wallet share from your customers, is how do you sell more products to your existing customer base? So what products are you selling today? Which are the highest gross margin products? And what products could you add to your mix as a place to start? With that, how will it impact your margin? Would it drive your margin up, or will it just drive gross sales up, but it doesn't have an impact on margin? Because ultimately, margin creates free cash, and free cash is what you need to fund the business. So, for example, if my gross sales go up, if I add more product sales, but if they're not at good margins, the answer is it could be just more work and not actually any more profit. So having good visibility to that's important. And for those of you who are in the numbers every day, you're like, this is obvious. For those of you who aren't in the numbers every day, the answer is it's kind of invisible. Like I don't know exactly how to see it. So I just want you to get a handle first on what are my costs associated with those products, and then the costs associated with delivering and selling those products. So, and also look at if we're going to add these new products, what's my cost of inventory? What's my cost of shipping? What's the availability of the products? So if I get to sell the product, but it's hard to deliver the product, it may end up creating a challenge there on overhead or to people's time responding to what the customer is. So product, where can I expand the product? What products are before my product and what products are after my product is a way to look at the product breakdown. So some examples of product pivots that I've seen a lot of over the last, so companies who weren't selling personal protective equipment now are, there were margin and availability, and basically they figured out some unique sources to sell those products. And because other people couldn't go scour the internet for it, they created those things as well. So I saw a lot of companies go into the business of making face masks. I saw a really cute one that was a company that sold to kids online. They created a whole line of masks for kids because they already had a customer base in parents and they were selling products for kids. So they just extended the product line into kids' products. For many of you, if you haven't done it yet, I would think about how do I move my product business online? That could be through an existing marketplace platform like Etsy or eBay or even Amazon, or it could be setting up a commerce platform on a website. So the nice thing about Shopify and WooCommerce and those tools these days is that they're really easy to set up. So if you have a website using WordPress today, you can buy a plugin for $99 a year, or you can use Shopify for basically free and a percentage of sales. And they're pretty easy to set up today. You can follow an online tutorial. So not difficult to do at all, but even if you had to hire somebody, you could hire somebody to do it very inexpensively. And the way I would do that, if you don't have a commerce site today, is I would go to a website called Fiverr, Fiverr, so fiverr.com. I'll put it here in the chat window. So Fiverr is a site that you can use to hire contractors. And I think of it, especially like if I have tasky stuff that I need to get done, I can have somebody, one of the things I'll do is I'll take an event like this and I'll take the recording and I want to have it transcribed. And the nice thing is they have a marketplace of people who will do transcriptions, who will do website development, who do design work, who will do logos. And in an hour after we record this, I could post that job on Fiverr. And for $20, I could have the entire session transcribed. So the minimum fee is about $20, but what you'll find there is it's super cheap and super fast. You just have to be able to think about, like, is it faster for me to tell somebody what I want done, or is it faster for me to do it? And for me, there's a bunch of tasks I look at, like I wanted to pull a list of companies off of a website. And I could easily go and type that in after hours and hit copy and paste, or I could post it as a job on Fiverr and for 20 bucks, have somebody go do that work for me. So think about it as extending your team to a virtual team. The nice thing about the way Fiverr works is everybody's scored and ranked. So if they don't do a good job, they're going to get a small mark. But if they do a great job, they're going to get 5 stars, which gives them a chance to then get more work. So for you, it's a question of what things can I train somebody to do? But unlike hiring an intern, these people actually have skills in the first place. You don't have to train the intern first before they become useful to you. Interns are always a challenge for me because it takes time for me to ramp them up, where if I can hire somebody on Fiverr to do something like that, it's super cheap. So Shopify is a good example. WordPress, you could literally have a WordPress site set up for you with your logo and your information with a connection to Shopify, and put product SKUs, your SKU, which is the stock keeping unit, a product with a price probably by this time tomorrow. So if you decide you need help there, let me know. I'm happy to point you in the right direction. So think about, how do you take your business online? The nice thing about what's happened with COVID is the market term for it is called digital transformation. What it really just means is stuff that people took a long time to go to online have now accelerated the usage of it using Zoom, for example. So Lynette, you look like I saw you come off mute, so I was see if you had a question.
No, I was asking everyone to put their industries in the chat. So you know what types of businesses we're talking to today, and maybe able to provide some more specific examples for them.
Perfect.
And
That's
someone
awesome.
did indicate they're in the travel industry. And what kinds of things, do you think could be helpful in them in this virtual reality that we're in?
Yeah, actually, I'll get to it in 2 slides. There's a great example. I saw a friend of mine, I'll use Joe as an example, actually, because he's a caterer. And obviously being a caterer in this market is super tough, right? So we actually set up a site for him. And one of the products he makes is he makes this awesome cooking oil, right? And Joe always would sell it, but Joe's an artist, right? So he's not always great at follow-up, and I love the guy to death, and he's been my caterer off and on for all my corporate events for years. But what we set up for Joe was we use a site called WooCommerce on his WordPress site, so people were able to go online, order his product. So that way we took Joe out of the challenge, right, of actually having to talk to people, which was an important thing. All right, let's talk about pivots on services really quick, and then we'll talk about some more examples, and we'll get to your examples too. So like the products, what services are you currently offering? Which ones are your most profitable services? So if you think about that, if it's just a couple of you, there's bill rate and pay rate. Who gets the higher gross margin when you bill them out for those services, which are the least? I was ran a consulting business of about 65 people, was one of the companies I started. So within consulting, it was always whose rate gets charged based on what the client was willing to pay. What skills into your team or your extended team have to offer that would allow you to extend your business offering into new market categories? So I see there's somebody referencing education consulting. What can you sell into different markets versus can you extend and bring in an associate or a 1099 contractor to help you deliver some of the services at better gross margins? How long will it take you to sell those services? One of the things about services is we tend to think about them in terms of like, oh, there's this much hours and this much work to deliver it, but you also have time spent in selling it. So how much time does it take me to sell that service offering as well? And then bill rate and pay rate is just your metric they're going to use to measure it, which gives you your effective gross margin. So if I have to pay, again, Dave, $25 an hour, I need to bill him at $50 an hour, or can I bill him at $65 an hour? One of the challenges, I think, is we get comfortable with our own pricing, and sometimes we need to do a price increase, and now may be a good time to do that price increase. It's always risky, and it causes anxiety for for us as founders, but it's definitely a challenge. All right, so let me give you some examples. I mentioned Joe's business as a caterer. One of the things in the corporate travel one, I would put, he started doing online classes. So he had a bunch of corporate clients who, like my wife works for a big pharma company, and they have all these team events they used to do, which they now can't do. So one of the things that Joe created was they do a menu kit, a menu. They would do a shopping list. They did on the corporate logo on the apron, and then they scheduled a Zoom call to do a cooking class for all these folks across. There was a big audience for them because that team was a global team for a tech company. So where Joe couldn't do catering the party for them, he actually did the cooking class for them, sent them all. An example was that the olive oil went out in the box. The logoed apron went out in the box. The recipe went out, as well as a shopping list. So they set the time up in advance to do that cooking class. The cooking class took a couple hours because it was a team event, and he had a chance to watch everybody's pan and see what they were doing and give them kudos. And I was teasing him about him afterwards because he had a great time doing it. And I said, so compared, like the time you spent on it on an hourly basis compared to the time you spent cooking, like what was your effective hourly rate? And he's like, oh, this was way more profitable because I had to do the prep work and I had to do this work. And then they did all the cooking instead of me doing the cooking, right? He's like, I showed him how to do it, but he had a great time, and ended up being something that a bunch of other departments within that tech company are now looking to do. So he's taken something.
A real job.
What's that?
I said, that's a real job. I could do that.
Yeah, I couldn't do it, but I could follow along. So he's a way better chef than I am, obviously. So the thing I would encourage you to think about is that for him, the other thing that he's doing right now, but I had to push him kind of hard to do, is he has emails from everybody he's catered with over the years, and he has a commissary that he does all the food prep with. So the thing I was encouraging him to do is just post a list of, here's the 3 menus, or here's the 3 things we're going to do cooking classes on in person. I'm like, I think you could probably fill up, 2 or 3 nights a week at the commissary, doing in-person, socially distanced, only 8 people, right? There's only so big you can do. But if you can book them out weeks in advance. So using tools here, there's a calendar tool called Calendly. There's a bunch of calendar tools, or you can use a tool like Eventbrite to sell the tickets. So we created an email for him where he could send out an email to a list of everybody he's catered with in the past and say, hey, here's what we're doing at the commissary. And over the next quarter, we have these 3 themes. One would be barbecue, one would be this, one would be that, one seasonal, right? And if you want, you can book one of these nights. But again, he's not good at details. So we wanted to automate as much as we could. So we used Eventbrite with a ticket price that allowed you to book 2, 4, or 8 seats at the event, pay for them in advance. That would then automatically go to his calendar and show that one was no longer available and was currently booked. So what we're trying to do is just like, how do we take some assets that we already have and repurpose them? So within the constraints of what he's good and not good at, just to be clear. So the tools there were Eventbrite allowed you to allow the customers to pay in advance. That money then could flow to PayPal or to your bank account, either way. And Eventbrite allowed you to do that. And then as soon as that was sold, so he'd put a list of, here are the events that are available. There were only 8 tickets available for that event. Once that event is sold, it's sold. Nobody else can buy tickets to that event. So it allows you to post your available inventory, in this case, an event seat ticket, and only be something you could sell for that. So just a great creative idea of what you could do for existing customers, even though he really didn't have a email list of customers that he originally, for many of us, I think you look at it and go like, oh, it would have been great to have an email list. Now's a good time to start it, right? It's never going to get easier. So let's look at a few of your other examples here, but I'm going to give you some time here to, we can talk about some brainstorming that you would use. One other example in Seattle that was kind of fun is a restaurant. There was a total high-end restaurant. It's called the Canlis. It's 3rd generation restaurant in Seattle. High-end dining was completely out. So one of the things they did over the summer was they did a drive-in and with a fixed menu. So you could actually order in advance, buy your ticket, and then they set up a blow-up screen in their parking lot, and they served people in their cars for the food and meals. And the brothers who now run it are third generation, and they're super creative. But it was fun because they ended up getting buzz on TV about it because it was visually interesting, right? So it showed the parking lot to this restaurant set up as a drive-in with a big blow up, and it ended up getting covered in news coverage because it was super fun. So if you can create buzz, that's a good thing as well. Most of us aren't necessarily as creative as that, but the idea there is super fun as well. So next topic, and then we'll go to your examples here too, is I want you to think about it in terms of market share and wallet share. The concept here on market share is, how do you sell to new markets, new customers, new geographies, new vertical markets? So it could be you're selling in one education space today, but it could be sold into government, or you're selling into, I saw janitorial today, but you could sell into a slightly different vertical of commercial. So the idea of market share is new customers. The idea of wallet share is more sales to existing customers, and we'll talk about both of them. So from a market share perspective, what percentages are you selling in your geography, or could you expand your geography? Is now, because virtual doesn't matter as much as it used to be before, since I can do Zoom calls, I don't have to be there with you in person, where I'd traditionally be limited on the fact that can I make that trip available work, and does the travel work? So can I expand my geography? Does it require you to expand your sales and marketing effort? For example, we talked about email lists. Do you need to grow that email list or not? And then sales, who's going to sell to those existing ones? It always, if the work always falls on you, one of the things we're going to look to do is what pieces of that work can we take off your list? So for example, I can hire somebody on Fiverr to go pull a list for me off a list of high growth companies from the Business Journal, or a list of similar businesses in your geography. So don't spam them, by the way. You can send them individual emails, but you don't want to spam them. But if you don't have a list, you can build a list. So gaining market share, if you talk to your existing customers today, and as you gain new customers, one of the things I want you to learn is, how did they hear about you? Was it all word of mouth? Was it web traffic? Was it a shop visit? Was it through some form of advertising? And then what you want to do is double down on those efforts that are actually producing those results. So if it's word of mouth, I want to make sure I give credit to Lynette if she gives me a referral, and I recognize that, and I give her a gift certificate or a thank you note. And you don't have to give that person money. It could be just a thank you note, and recognition is all you really need to do. But the concept there is, again, getting new customers, what's working for you today, and double down on those things, especially when they have relatively small costs. Should I be targeting competitors? Here's a super geeky tech thing to do, but one of the things you can do is what's called buying their brand. If you know you have a competitor that people are searching for, you can actually go to Google Analytics on your website. Again, you can have somebody on Fiverr do this for you. And you can go to Google Keyword Planner, which is in the link. And I can put in the URL, or the domain name of my big competitor, and I can actually buy their name. So if you're used to seeing that on a Google web or a Google search, if I put in Dave Parker's name, which Dave Parker obviously indexes way better than I do because he was with the Pittsburgh Pirates and he's super famous, right? But I could actually buy Dave Parker's name in advance. So there's a paid search result and an organic search result, right? So I met Dave at one point. It was one of those where I was like, he's a super tall dude. And I did introduce myself as Dave Parker. So, but yeah, I can actually buy that brand name. So for you could be able to, for 50 cents a click, actually buy your competitor's brand name on the web and send that traffic to your website. Just make sure that if you send them to your website, you have a super clear call to action. We'll talk about that in a second. A call to action is just a way for the customer to interact with you. And you want to make sure if you're buying that traffic, if you pay for Google AdWords, it's always good for Google and it's occasionally good for you. But we'll talk more about tactical marketing stuff coming up in a couple of weeks. So is there a chance to expand your geography? Is now a good time to find a potential partner or assume somebody else's lease or maybe buy their customer list? It could be that it gives you a chance to look for another location. And obviously these ideas range from super low risk, which is marginal and marketing stuff and Google AdWords, to maybe I should go buy a competitor. Depends on your risk appetite as well. Do you want to open a new city? And we'll talk about buying and selling and thinking about those things at the final session that we do on this one, coming up on 10/22. So you know. All right, improving your marketing. Couple tools here. Wix is super inexpensive. A WordPress site's super inexpensive. You can use MailChimp to build your email list. It's free for under 500 emails. And I think with mine, I've got 20,000 emails. I think it's $35 a month. You do need to get permission to do email marketing. So you can send people an email the first time or ask them when they come in on their invoice if it's okay if you send them a monthly update. You just need to be regular on your frequency, because part of what you're doing is you're cultivating and just helping be top of mind. And one of the things you want to do as a small business is be top of mind. By the way, the slides there, if you go all the way up to the top of it, you'll see there's a link to both the slides and SlideShare and a link to that event that I talked about at the very beginning. So they're there for you as well. So an email asks for permission, but Fiverr, email, you can build that list. All right. So November 5th, we'll be talking about marketing and really how do you do tactical marketing. We'll give you much the how-tos. The call to action is, do you want to book an appointment with me? Do you need a bid or a proposal? Do you want to come in and schedule a time? Like, make sure if you're going to get traffic to your website, there's a clear call to action. It's just not generic. If it's generic, you may double the traffic on the website, but if there's no way for people to contact you, you're not actually using that advertising spend very effectively. So social media presence is another great way to do it. How frequently are you posting? What are you posting? And one of the things I'd encourage you to do is have your own voice. Like, make sure that you've thought about is that voice fun? Is that voice whimsical? Is that voice serious? And just have a consistent voice in how you portray that on social media. So a couple things to think about in your marketing. All right, share of wallet's the next topic, and then we'll get to the brainstorming session. Share of wallet is really just how do you sell more to your existing customers. So I would survey those, take your biggest top 10 customers, survey them on a Zoom call like this, and just ask them the questions like, what else, what do you guys do before you buy our product or service? What do you do after you buy our product, service? How else can we help you? With your biggest customers that really are your partners. And one of the things I would encourage you to think about is, how do you go ask them how you can help them? You want to know more about their business and their planning. So one of the things I did with one of my big customers now is I was like, let's talk about 2021. What are you thinking for those things in 2021? Should I be planning more time for you or less time for you? I just want to know what they're thinking and what they're planning. And rather than guess, I'm just going to go ask them. Upstream and downstream, you talked about for products. It applies here in both services as well. What things do they have challenges with before they buy our service? What things do they have challenges with after they buy our service? And where are they seeing friction today? Like, what things are they like, oh, this one's really hard. We can't find a good vendor, or this person went out of business and closed. So look for opportunities on both sides of where you're currently doing business. Is it a chance to expand into a different product line or a different service line, or is it a chance to add an additional person because you can put them in that as a customer? And again, quarterly, monthly, I would take my top 10 customers and just interact with them regularly and ask if I can schedule some regular time on their calendar to know what they're thinking about, and how, even if it's a risky one where you're like, I don't know how they're doing for business, but I still want to schedule some time and say, well, how can we help you, right? You'll find opportunities, but you just have to be super close to it. So gaining share, just remember that the cheapest customer you have is the one you already have. So going out and getting a new customer has time associated, it has cost associated with your time or your service or the advertising. So the cheapest customer you have is the one you already have. So what else can you sell them becomes super important. What do those top 10 customers have in common? What are they different about? Think about that as if some of them are in different vertical markets, you're like, well, these customers all buy from me, but only 5 of them are like the same, and then they're different. So where can you find other customers like the ones that are different and expand your customers? So if you're selling to commercial real estate today and somebody else is in the property management business, you're like, how do we get more property managers would be one of the questions I'd want to ask. And then what other products or services? How do you look at your recurring contracts? Like, could you sell them longer term contracts? Is now a chance to do a price increase? Or if you could get a longer term contract, would you do a price decrease or a discount? I'm generally not a fan of discounting, but if, sometimes to get a long-term contract, the answer is, if we can get a long-term contract, I'd take a little bit of a discount. So with that, I'm going to transition to just brainstorming and doing some Q&A for you all. And I'll go back through and look at the notes here as well. But what ideas are you thinking of? And we're happy to, I'm not the guru of gurus here. You've got some great folks on the line too. So I see education, consultant, engineering, professional services. What challenges are you having today that we might be able to talk about? Feel free to take yourself off mute and ask. Or you can drop it in the chat if you want to do it that way too. Online art gallery. Adrian, tell me more about how are you getting customers to an online art gallery these days? Is it a website that I can order art? If you're talking, you're on mute.
Can you allow people to unmute?
Yeah, I think they can. So she said correct. So where does most of your traffic come from? Is it organic search results where people know you in the market and that's what they're searching for? Or are you buying traffic today as well? All right. Can you guys unmute? Or did I get that wrong?
Dave, can you hear me? This is Anna.
Yep.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi.
I'm the one that has the professional services and engineering company.
Uh-huh.
I own it with my husband. He's the engineer, and I would like to expand. I have one main consulting contract that I also put under his business, but I'd like to expand the scope of our business to offer that. How would you market like engineering and everything? Is there a place for it?
Yeah. So who's your customer profiles today? If you took your top 10 customers today, what types of businesses are you selling to today?
Major construction companies.
Okay. So one of the things I would do then is I'd go out and look at, okay, within the geography you currently serve, what are the lists of major construction companies? And are we currently selling into all of those today? And then I would look at the next market adjacent territories like Shreveport or whichever geography you think is the next most interesting. And again, you can buy a list. There's list services. You can actually go online and buy a list of major construction companies. And you can actually buy a list of both the construction companies and the buyers. And I think actually, Lynette, your team has done a good job of really putting together a bunch of resources for vendors. So I look at my existing customer profiles today and say, I'm going to look for more of those in a broader geography. And then what I would do is put together the email campaign and a one-pager on the product or the services you guys currently offer and who you've currently done work for, because that concept is really just what's called social proof, right? We're not a new engineering firm. We're an engineering firm that's been around for X number of years. We've done business for these companies, but we're expanding our geography and coming into Shreveport or wherever the next city is that you want to go into. And then I'd start that as an email campaign with a one-pager follow-up so I could start to build connections into those lists. There's some cool tools that are cheap that you can use as well that will help you. So there's a product called HubSpot, and HubSpot is a CRM. It's not customer relationship management in the sense of technically that's what it is, but you can actually subscribe for free and it will tell you if somebody opened that email or not. You can also put in, you'll see in the footer of my email, if you get an email from me, it says book a time with Dave. And you can actually use HubSpot will then connect that person with that scheduled item, and it will synchronize with your Apple Calendar or Google Calendar. So I'm a big fan of using tools to automate as much process as you can, right? Especially when the tools are cheap or free. So I'd buy that list. I'd start to do the email marketing with that list first. I'd see who opened my email, which is automated. You'll get a note from HubSpot that says, Dave opened your email, right? And then I'd put a call to action in the email that says, if you'd like to schedule a time with us to talk about your next project, or if you'd like to read what our customers have to say about us, click here and go to your website. So I try to do that as much as I can with that. And then I start doing the heavy lifting is just making some phone calls to those folks and say, when do you have a project coming up that we could be part of the bid process on? We know we're not going to get in from, scratch, but we want to get into the process. So I'd use your customer references, and we'll talk about that when we do the marketing session. Like, how do I build credibility with my existing customers to leverage into some new customers as well? Is that helpful, Ann?
It's tremendously helpful. I'm furiously taking notes. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. When we talk about the marketing session coming up, we'll go into this in detail. We'll talk about HubSpot. Again, anytime you can use tools and tech. So I think of this, especially in the services business that most of you all are in, is this concept of productizing a service. So how do I take a service business that I have and make it as easy in the front end to automate the lead generation and traffic, so that people can say like, oh, we want to hear from you, right? We want to capture that traffic. And then how do we use tools and technology in the back end, like the calendar tool I use is called Calendly. So you can get on my calendar by clicking that link, and we don't have to send emails back and forth about like, what time are you available? What time are you available? It's like, no, just click here, right? And the answer is shows you Dave's calendar. Now, a trick on this one, by the way, is you'll see that if you looked at my calendar, you'll see I'm never available between 8 and noon. I just block that on my calendar, so it never shows as available. So I don't want to be available to everybody all the time. And I do a lot of international stuff, so I end up with some wacky hours. So I can set what times I'm available. And then as you book something, that time is not available to anybody else. But that calendar tool, I think, is like $40 a year. And so if I can save time on stuff like that, I'm totally going to find a hack to save time on stuff like that.
Absolutely.
I see here, Raymond, your note, finding new customers is my biggest challenge. Not a new business, but I've never had a customer cold call, send emails, letters, etc., conventions. So more ideas on how to find new customers, corporate meeting and planning space, and work in the travel rewards. Okay, cool. So one of the things I always look for is the best way for me to get new customers is word of mouth. It's hard to track, but I want to make it easy for people to make those introductions. So one of the things that I've done pretty effectively, Raymond, is I do what's called a forwardable email. So I'm doing this work for Lynette. I may follow up with Lynette and say, hey, thank you for letting me be on the training program today. I've attached a quick bio of me. If you can think of anybody else that's in this similar business that could use my services, would you forward this to them? But what I don't want to do is I don't want to make it work for Lynette. So I'm gonna write the first paragraph that says, hey, Lynette, thanks very much for using me for these training services. If you know anybody else who would be useful, I've included a paragraph summary. I'm not gonna make it TLDR, too long, don't read, right? I'm gonna make it succinct and to the point. It says, hi, my name is Dave Parker. Here's my business. We're in the event travel. We work with referrals because we found that that's the best way for us to work. And we do corporate training and travel. So don't make your customer write your profile for you. I always think about it as I referenced for some of you who were on early, my son got married. I could show you a picture of him when he was 2 and it would be true, but it wouldn't be accurate. And if I asked Lynette to write the introduction for me, it would be true, but it wouldn't necessarily be accurate. So what I'm going to do is give her an email that she can forward. And I'm going to make it super easy and friction-free for her to do that. So I'm going to ask her, hey, would you forward this to people who do what you do, and if there's anybody interested in my services? So that's the way I'd start. I'd start with your existing customers, and I'd ask them, because people tend to know people in their own verticals. So if they tend to know folks who are in corporate travel, it would be like, do you have any other folks that you know in the industry that you would refer me to? make that super easy to be a referral. Let them know that you can forward it. You don't have to have my permission, and you don't have to tell me. So most of the time, so I'm an author. I'm getting a new book out. It comes out in March, but I make my money by selling companies. That's so because doing book stuff is, who knows whether it makes any money or not, right? I hope it does, but we'll find out in April, maybe May of next year. So think about it in the standpoint of how do I make it easy for them to do it, and how do I explain my message without them having to do the work is a good place to start.
Right.
Other questions from you all?
Well, Dave, Britt has a question. Using Google Analytics, it's telling him that he has hundreds of people who are viewing his listing, but he's not able to convert that to sales. So what's the best way for him to look at people who are looking at his listing and convert those lists into customers?
Yeah, so one of the things I test there, Britt, is if you're getting the traffic to the site, which it looks like you are from Google Analytics, I would look at a couple things like what's my bounce rate? And this, hang in there for those of you who don't have Google Analytics yet, I'll explain it as you go. Google Analytics will show you total traffic, who's there now, and what pages they're visiting. If you have a super high bounce rate, the answer is the people are finding you, but they're moving off to something else really fast. So it probably means your call to action on the website isn't particularly clear. So if you send it to me, I'll give it a quick look when we're not, I won't do it online real time in front of everybody else, but if you send it, so just Dave@DKParker is my email. So Dave@DKParker.com. I'll give it a quick look, and I'm happy to look at the Google Analytics with you. But I think what you'll see is the call to action isn't crisp. So you're selling to kids 4 to 12 years. So if there's not a clear call to action, they'll read through it, but they won't see what to do next. Is it call me and schedule an appointment? Is it click on this calendar link and schedule a time? Is it see a demo, right? So what do they do next after they see your site is the one thing I'd want to know next. I see there's some other notes there. Oh, you're welcome, Brett. Yeah, call to action is like, so one of the things we looked at in the book content was which revenue models do startup companies use to make money? And we looked at 2,650 companies, and we also went back and looked at all the ones that failed. And there's a tool called the Wayback Machine. So you can look at every cached page of the internet from all back time. So think of it as, it's like Wikipedia, right? It's a public nonprofit. So we went back and looked at the last page of all of those businesses before they failed. And one of the things you saw, almost 85% of them were, there wasn't a clear call to action. There wasn't a pricing page. Like I didn't know how to buy. Like, do I give you a credit card? Do I schedule an appointment? Like, I was curious enough to get to your page, but I didn't know what to do. And 85% of those companies that failed didn't have a product price, or didn't have a product page, didn't have a price page, and didn't have a call to action. It was the one thing they all shared in common. So let me put my email there is Dave@dkparker.com. So that's my email. You can also find me on WhatsApp. You can also find me on Calendar. So if you get an email back, it'll have a footer that says book a time with Dave. So Lynette, I know we're coming to the end of our time. Any other questions you wanted to cover today, or I'll open it up for more questions for the folks online.
Yeah, no, I think we're good. I think, guys, please ask your questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, if there's something specific you're thinking about doing that you thought might work, here's the time to get an expert to answer your questions.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a hacker that way. It's always stuff I want to test, right? I'm always testing things. So thanks, Raymond. It was a pleasure. So, all right. Well, the slides are available on SlideShare. The team will make sure they get them out to you. If you're in a high growth company, I would encourage you to look at the Rise of the Rest virtual bus tour. They're going to do $2 million of investing in that one. And I'll be working with the OHub team to do a one-day ideation boot camp, as well as the 4-week pre-accelerator program. So, and again, those are free. So you just have to apply for them. So if it's useful, I hope you can make it to one of those, or look forward to having you in an upcoming session. And we'll talk more about the marketing side as well as talking about how do you exit your company or prepare it for your kids, or what do you do with it now that you've created this value? How do you capture some of the value you created?
Right. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for being here again today. And I hope that I always learn something new. I've heard Dave give presentations, and the next time he does it, I always seem to learn something else. So I hope that you guys found this valuable, got some great information from it. You know, our next session is in 2 weeks. Valerie, help me out. I think it's on October 8th. Yeah, in any case, you know, we'll get some information to you guys after this one. But I also wanted to make sure that you guys know that on our website, NOLA BA's website, our small business team, we've developed some tools that were developed exclusively for small business owners. And I know someone had asked earlier about getting some data around their for a competitive analysis. And so we have a very comprehensive data tool called NOLA Bit. It's on our website at nolaba.org. And there is a plethora of data, publicly sourced data, local, federal, state data, competition information, industry analysis, all kinds of data that will help inform your business plans, your strategic plans, help you to determine whether, you know, the business you're thinking about going in is actually, you know, marketable. And we also have the Crescent City Biz Connector tool. It's a navigation tool that will get you to local business assistance providers who can provide assistance to your businesses. So based on what you need, what stage your business is in, you can put in a few queries and it'll give you a list of providers locally here that can help you. And once you put your information in, it'll send information to those providers to say, let them know that you are interested in their businesses. And then finally, we have our opportunities portal. And so earlier I talked to you about our procurement council, and this is a group of public and private companies that meet monthly to strategize around making more opportunities available for local companies and minority companies. And they post their opportunities on that portal. So at nolaba.org, you would go to expand and locate, and then click on the small business tab, and it'll bring you to all of those tools. They're free for all New Orleans businesses to use. So we hope that you'll, you know, go on and take advantage of that. But we want to thank our special guest, Dave Parker, with such valuable information today. And I'd also be remiss if I didn't thank the NOLA BA staff, Valerie Huntley, who helps to put all of this together and make all of this connect and look good, and Naomi Hare. And we hope that we'll see you guys here in 2 weeks for our next session.
And if you know people who need help with marketing, that session's coming up as well. So invite them to come back, and we'll walk you through the from setup to launch on the marketing one.
Absolutely. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Enjoy
you,
your day.
guys.